Hey everyone, God bless you, and thanks a lot for tuning in. I have a reflection for you today that I'm entitling Gun Control. Before I launch into that, let me encourage you a happy Saint Sabbath Day on this 5th of December. December is just packed with incredible saints. I feel like I say that all the time, though. Every month, truly, we are rich. We are rich. Our patrimony is immeasurable. We're halfway through the Advent fast. We have 20 days to go to celebrate the only thing new in the world, which is the incarnation of the Son of God, the coming of Christ to the earth, and the reality of the God-man. But my focus today is on gun control. The reason I want to talk about this, and let me explain kind of what the angle I'd like to take, is because I find myself, as I'm sure you find yourselves, so deeply grieved by the level of violence that we are experiencing. This isn't just the localized criminal violence that's going on in our communities. That is certainly the highest level in my lifetime here in Southern California. But the global violence, the warfare that is going on in Gaza and the Ukraine, in our national scene, and I'm sure it's like this in many countries, I know it is in many Western countries, terrible acts of violence, grotesque acts of murder take place. And immediately we start talking about politics. And this politician weighs in on gun control, and this politician weighs in on the Second Amendment. And we completely obfuscate the real issue, which is the status of the human heart and the grip of violence, the dehumanizing way of living, the wrath and anger and clamor and slander that has escalated to such terrible heights. Certainly no one alive today can be anything but gripped by great grief over violence. To watch what's going on in the Holy Land on both sides, so hideous. For Orthodox Christians, particularly the grief over the loss of 500,000 young men sent to fight for what? For what? What could possibly justify the death of 500,000 young men? We are terrorized, really. And it's not just the violence, but also the technology that is now associated with the violence and the terror that seizes us when we contemplate the nuclear weapons that we have, and now the artificial intelligence that adds a new component of fear in our discussions about how we can kill others. It's easy in a situation like this, in a context like this, to focus upon the weapons. That's a huge mistake. That's a huge mistake. The focus should be upon us. Gun control should be a discussion about heart control, about being a human being. I recently finished reading Andrew Roberts' massive 800-page tome on Napoleon. And this just made me reflect even more about the current state of violence in the world and here in the United States. Technology has increased so massively, and warfare, violence, the ability to kill our opponents has always been the key driving force in the development of technology since the fall of man, all the way back to Tubal-Cain. We develop our technology so that we can kill people under the justification that we're defending ourselves. And then we use that technology sometimes for this or that aspect of human civilization. But the core driver is the passion to kill our opponents. This is a massive heart problem. And if we remove even the last 200 years of military weapons, gun technology, and we go back to the time of Napoleon, you see the same miserable love of violence, the same willingness to demonize your opponent and justify the murder, of course, mostly of young men, in order to advance the idea of this or that autocrat who, without batting an eyelash, is inspired by outrageous arrogance to think that they know what's best and we need to invade this country because it's important, always full of hideous justifications for their grotesque violence and immorality. So it's not just a matter of having the weapons that we have today. This is a systemic problem of fallen man. It's a heart problem. And it plagues us to greater degrees. It's always with us, but it erupts depending upon the inspiration of great sinners like Napoleon himself. But as Napoleon was coursing through Europe, conquering kingdom after kingdom, invading country after country without being invited to come in, not just in Europe, but in North Africa, in Egypt, in the Holy Land, always there without any shame, this one-time French revolutionary who ends up becoming a monarchist and a great proponent of, really, it's a very clear picture that the ideology is irrelevant. What must be done is your opponents must be killed, and you must sacrifice people for the good of the nation. Most of the time, forgive me, what a bunch of hogwash. What a bunch of hogwash, just to justify greed and autocratic ambitions. And let me just say a word to the idealization of monarchs. During Napoleon's time, the Orthodox were no better. Sorry. Tsar Alexander was no saint. Gun control is a huge political topic, but let me instead suggest to you the central issue when we're talking about the rise of violence and its expression in our society. That's not where the saints talked. That's not what they turned their minds to, is the issue of how to control guns through political laws, establishing laws about controlling guns. No, they dealt with the heart. And St. John Chrysostom, in his commentary on St. Matthew's Gospel, addresses this very clearly. And I like to read from his 57th homily on his commentary to St. Matthew, where he addresses this issue head on. The context is an outbreak of violence and killing, murder, and violence that was being blamed by some in his congregation on alcohol. Right? There's always those people get drunk and do terrible things, and therefore we're going to blame the wine, or on the weapons themselves. Listen to the great Golden Mouth here. He says, "When these deplorable excesses happen, many cry out, 'Would that there were no wine.'" Okay, so this is a late 4th century, and violence breaks out, and the people blame the wine. It's just very similar to today. Terrible murders, mass murders, the guns. Anything but addressing the issue of the human heart. Anything but addressing the decline in virtue, the lack of respect for other human beings. What is his opinion, Chrysostom? What folly, what madness. Men sin, and you straightway blame the gifts of God. It is utter lunacy. Is it the wine that causes the abuse? Of course not. It is the intemperance of those who take a wrong delight in it. Say rather, would to God there were no drunkenness and luxury. Would to God that passion would decrease. Would to God that people would take their souls seriously and stop sinning out of fear of God and the coming judgment. For if you shout, would that there be no wine, you should add, would that there would be no steel because of the murderers. Here you have it, right? Here you have it. Here Chrysostom exactly addresses this issue of blaming the weapons instead of the murderers themselves. It's as foolish to blame the wine as it is to blame the steel. If you shout, would that there be no wine, you should add, would there be no steel because of the murderers? Would there be no night because of the thieves? You're going to blame the darkness for thieves breaking into a house, or are you going to blame them in their hearts, our hearts, of greed? You could do away with everything in this way. It is a satanical way of arguing. Wine was given to us that it might be a source of delight, not that we might dishonor ourselves. God honored us with the gift. Why do we dishonor ourselves by abusing it? Here I think we see an inspired mind, the mind of the church, which keeps its focus on the centrality of the human being and the centrality of the heart. You want a wonderful, peaceful society, even a reasonably peaceful society in this fallen world. It's only going to be fashioned by people who lift up the name of God and acknowledge God. If you're going to have a society that bans public discourse about God, that doesn't honor Him, that doesn't support fundamental religious principles, if you're going to continue down this grotesque secularism, this is what you get. This is what you get. You don't focus on the human soul. You don't focus on the heart of human beings. You treat human beings like they're just made up of stuff and that there's nothing awe-inspiring about them. Then what's wrong with killing someone? That's just stuff. It's not that big a deal. You don't have even an ethical framework to bring censure against violence. No, you just have to talk about politics. The issue is not steel. It's not the weapons. And it's not the guns. Chrysostom says that is a satanical way of thinking. The problem is us. We're the problem. Our lack of repentance, our abuse, our subsequent lack of peace because we're indulging all sorts of passions and it tears us apart. Our judgment and projection against others instead of ourselves because we're not cultivating humility, and we've supported a whole public structure of discourse that is based upon criticism and acrimony. Our lack of the fear of God, our failure even to think about the judgment, let alone to talk about it nationally, our unbelief, our pride, our self-centeredness. These are the things that we must attend to, dear ones, if we want to control violence, if we want it to go down. If we don't address those things as the core of the problem, we're just playing games. We're just playing games. May the Lord look with compassion upon us. May He bring reason back to us. May we return to the acknowledgement of God and to true repentance. And then we could hope for better days. Then we can have peace. And God keep this satanical way of thinking from us, blaming wine and weapons. God be with you.
Patristic Nectar Publications is pleased to announce the launch of PNP Kids, our new YouTube channel for children's content. Please join us for story time with Presbytera Catherine as she reads Orthodox children's literature. We invite you also to join Father Jason each week for the Sunday Gospel and children's homilies. And tune in to Cloud of Witnesses, where a full cast of performers reenact the lives of the saints. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel at Patristic Nectar Kids, or find us via the PNP Kids podcast on your favorite podcast streaming platform. And please consider making a donation to Patristic Nectar Publications so that we may continue to offer more free content.